All right. From the Student Fairfax City, we are very grateful that Larry Fass accepted our invitation to our show. Larry, welcome back to my humble podcast, man.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
No, no problem. Let's talk a little bit. I want to dig deeper into the synergy period. I think in many ways at the time, Wendy Carter was important. The Tangerine Dream was important coming out of Germany. But I think you are one of the pioneers in electronic music in many ways. I believe that synergy generated ripples among, pro consumer and electronic uh, uh, musician and addict as well, like myself. When you were working at the beginning of the first or second album, you knew the effect that your music was having on consumers, on radio station, on program. You were touring a little bit at the time.
I followed my own instincts more or less. It was what I wanted to be hearing that I wasn't hearing from other
Ooh.
artists or other releases. And so there are elements of the Wendy Carlos classical catalog and some of the sound uh, scoring work that she had done. But there are other the pure classical like Tomita was doing. There were various switched on classical albums, so I was listening to them, and in most cases, not trying to emulate. I was more or less disappointed in many cases, so I just listened to them in order to figure out what I did not want to do. And then there was the elements of in progressive music where keyboards and synthesizers and mellotrons were becoming king at that point. And I thought that was great too, but there was a different approach that most of the keyboardists that I really respected. I have a lot of, um, for instance, even somebody who had become a friend like Rick Wakeman, what he was doing, drawing on his classical and piano background, was not really what I wanted to be doing. But it didn't mean I didn't enjoy listening to what he was doing. But I just had a different direction that I wanted to go. I knew it was somewhere I was going to draw on a lot of classical elements and more electronics, but I was never giving up that background in rock, going back to the Beatles or even earlier, and later some of the elements of progressive rock, which just happened to have an overlap. So that was it. And I was fortunate in that the record label was also very uh, well. They weren't. They There was not a heavy hand. Let's put it that way. They just said, do what you want to do. If we really think something is uncommercial or we need something a little more commercial now and again, they would certainly speak up. But for the most part, it was follow your instincts. Let's see where it goes.
Now, nowadays, it for at the time you were, believe it or not, 50 years ago when you released the first album, 75, um, you, it was easier or easy at the time to get a record label with a get a deal with a record label because nowadays young kids in the mid 20s that are starting, they wanna. It's very hard to do it. It was
It was pretty hard to do then. I'd already been
really,
around once through the development deal cycle with
yeah.
a different, and they were the gatekeepers. There really wasn't an independent scene that amounted to anything. It was hard to get records pressed. Studio costs were, prohibitive for most individuals. You needed the funding from an organization like a label or a music publishing company, and so it's different now. Labels, the major labels, don't quite have the complete dominance of the business. They still dominate all the major sales, but it's very different. And of course, the methods of distribution have changed so dramatically. When it was nothing but vinyl or maybe a little bit in 8 tracks and cassettes, it was still all physical media sold through stores. The entire wholesale chain was very well defined and had been for a few generations. So all that's gone. There's just you don't you have independent record stores, a few small places, but it isn't huge retailers. There's no giant music section that dominates in the big box stores now the way they used to. And everyone did. And every five and dime, you could go to Woolworths and buy the top 50, 45s. It's very much changed. And so that changed the dynamics within the record labels. There were a lot of smaller labels, but they would get snapped up by the bigger labels. But there were, I think, 10 major labels when I was first getting into the business, and then 7, then 6, and 4. Now it's sort of 3, maybe 2.5. Depends on how you look at the economics of it. So it's a very different thing. I don't think it's ever been easy. I think it's just been different in different ways, difficult in different ways over different times.
I'm trying to, we talked about Bandcamp and Spotify last time, and it's too bad people don't get any money, but people need to be creative and adjust, right? Or switch careers, I suppose, right? Easy for me to say because I'm not a composer or musician. So, but nowadays it's kind of very hard to, make it, so to speak. Fewer and fewer people are buying. Although, yes, overall the trend is going down. But I go to many stores during the weekend here where I live. Saturday and Sunday is full of people. They sell a lot of music, and they have soundtrack section, electronic music section, pop, jazz. The jazz they're selling. At least in the old jazz and ECM record label, hundreds of on a during the weekends. So.
Well, the interest is there. I mean, I've seen that when I'll check out a vinyl store from time to time, and there are a lot of people in there and a lot of good records. There's some new ones around the time of Record Store Day, but the bulk of what I see in the inventory in the store is recycling records that somebody bought many years ago, and then they found their way back into the retail stream. And there are fans, and they're fans of musicians long since left the planet, but left some great music, and they're buying their records, on vinyl often, sometimes on CD. So there's interest, and it's still a multi-billion-dollar business. It's just that for a period between the 1970s and I guess when it really started to unravel in the 1990s, there was extraordinary wealth to be made. Big business, corporate interests that found their way into the business helped generate some huge fortunes. And prior to that, it wasn't that big a business. I think I had seen a figure that before the Beatles hit, the entire record industry did about $300 million in business. That's nothing to sneeze at. And if you translated it into today's dollars, it would probably be several $billions.
Yeah.
But then it exploded into an absolutely humongous business. And, that's where superstar acts were making ungodly amounts of money in private jets, and incredible wealth was generated for a short time. And then it settled back down. And in a lot of ways, I look at pictures of the early 1950s, Les Paul in his home studio and the work that he was doing, people that were kind of creating the genre, the studios, Sun Records, where Elvis got his start. These were relatively modest, because one, the equipment hadn't developed technologically so much, but these were smaller, lower cost operations. And the money to be generated from the sales of singles by the time it came back, if you had a hit single in the pre-album era, before the late 1960s, 1970s, these sold for under $1, well under $1, 69 cents, 39 cents, through the distribution change. By the time anything came back up the system, through the label, to the publisher, to the artist, there was pennies per sale. So people were feeling rich because the average American was making $4,000 a year, let's say, if you're really rock and roll, and somebody could make $20,000 or $30,000 being a newly minted rock star. It seemed enormously wealthy, but it wasn't in the bigger scheme of things. And over time, the numbers just went up and up. Now it's settled back down. A lot of those people work second jobs. They didn't give up their day job until they had achieved quite a level of success. And it wasn't just there. It was, the sports industry was the same way. In the off-season, baseball players sold cars at car dealerships or made personal appearances. They had to supplement that income because they weren't paid these multi-million dollar contracts, even for big teams. So, everything's gotten inflated, and in some areas, it's probably stretched out of control. And now we're getting back to where people do it for the art, the true hardcore people. It's not to get rich. It's to express what their artistic drive is. And I think that's the most important part of it.
Yeah, I suppose you need to look within yourself, with your family, right, and decide what is important to you, right? If music or art or a painter or writer, whatever, keep your day job as long as you can, I suppose, right? To feed your family until you struggle, blood, sweat, and tear, you are able to publish the first book or the first record or whatever, and then make a decision. But it's very, very, very tough nowadays. I have interviewed during the pandemic, especially. I interviewed so many musicians that they were great, but the current tour, the wife or the kids were complaining, so he or she ended up leaving the music business, got a job, working somewhere, went to school, and music, was forgotten, unfortunately. But that was a crazy time. 1975. This is your first record, electronic realization of orchestra, all by Passport Record. It's 19. Believe it or not, so next year, man, when I talk to you again, will be 50 years of this
Yeah, I
album.
think that's amazing. And of course, it was being put together 50 years ago. Some of the elements of that go back 52 years, 52, 53 years now.
I see you were waking before, right? You were
Yeah,
creating
some of
music
the
before you end up, releasing the record, right?
exactly.
It's a very, very, very good album, and I think the track that I really like is Legacy, my favorite track and in my opinion, that album is one of the most innovative and important recording in the 20th century, to tell you the truth. I mean, I like electronic music soundtrack, and I have, I don't know, like in that area within film, score, electronic music. I don't know. I think I have at least 2,000 vinyl, and that one and the second one are one of my favorite. And of course I'm a fan of Wendy Carlos and the Klaus Schulze at the time, and Peter Baumann and the Tangerine Dream guys, and Manuel Gauch and this guy. But that album in particular, it's a masterpiece, if you don't mind saying that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. How difficult was to for putting that one together and releasing that one, because at the beginning you have idea, you work for a while, man, you wonder, well, I'm doing this for me, but I wonder if the market's going to be receptive and approach a record label, and then gamble and releasing that. How difficult it was.
Well, the label part of it had already been evolving since late 1973. And so it was kind of a foregone conclusion by the late spring, early summer of 1974 that this was going to get done. This album would be recorded and released. A lot of the marketing and how it would be managed, distributed, that's all the record labels. That's their problem. That's their job. So I didn't really think too much about that. They had already been somewhat the gatekeepers in saying that, okay, we are going to invest the money to put this out. We already kind of understood that because there wasn't a band, there wasn't a big advance, it was financially quite manageable what the studio time would cost. So, just based on looking at comparable sales of other acts, which, the record industry can compare itself, labels can track some of the other ones. You get a rough idea of what's going on. It seemed that it had a fairly low threshold to hit break even, at least for the label, not necessarily for the artist, but so that it wasn't a huge amount of risk, and it would be nice artistic achievement for me and for the label to be associated with it. So that part of it wasn't so bad. The technical part of creating it, fortunately, and this happens all the time with new artists, you've been writing your first album your whole life. You've been working on it, as you're trying to get a foothold in the business, get signed, get into the mainstream to get it going. So I'd been working on elements of it, some of it when I was in college, as part of music courses, composition courses, some of it with my old band, which had broken up, but they were parts that I had been responsible for. Legacy is made up of a lot of segments from those prior elements. And that's why the name, because it was a legacy to what had come before. But writing's never been a problem for me. I really have more ideas than I know what to do with. So it's a matter of making the time to sit down and do it. And that, of course, knowing that there was an album that was imminent, I was doing that. I was working, I did have a job with an electronics company as technical director, which was a regular 9 to 5 job, but very flexible. So I was able to take time off and do what was needed for the record part of things. Even while I'd be at the office, I'd be getting phone calls from the record company president, and I would always make time for that. So, I had a small but steady paycheck coming in, and it took a lot of pressure off. It meant that I could spend the time, evenings, weekends, when I would take a day off, working on writing, pre-recording the album, because the whole thing was laid out ahead of time on 4-track tape, just to get an idea. Patches were notated, so I knew exactly what was going to be happening when we finally hit the studio, which was right after New Year's in 1975. So there wouldn't be any wasted time and, in fact, wasted money. That was the whole idea, was to keep the recording process focused, prepared, and kind of lean and mean. Because, of course, the label was the one laying out the money. I wasn't taking money out of my pocket to do it. So they were very generous with that, but I didn't want to take advantage. And in another sense, it was self-preservation in the record industry, because the way record contracts are written, the money you spend on things like recordings and even ordering out for food or anything that's a part of making the record ultimately gets charged back to the artist. You don't see royalties until that payback has been done. So I knew that very well, how it worked, and I was determined to keep those costs as efficient as possible. So they were happy at the label. Marty Scott, who was the president and was executive producer on the album, he was happy we were on the same page. And so we plowed through it, and I was very well prepared. It was in some ways almost like an Alfred Hitchcock movie, because where Hitchcock would plan every shot in every scene before they actually went into the shooting stage and started. I was pretty much prepared the same way. I had everything prototyped up, mocked up, done in a kind of lo-fi way, but I knew exactly where we were going with this album. And there were only a couple of fill-in-the-blank parts that got done in the studio during the main recording.
No, you are very efficient. I have talked to several bands that they went to studio for days, and they using, top of the line mixer, recording engineers, and producer, and they at the end there was a great album. They only make $500 or whatever. I'm making that up, right? A good example will be Propaganda, the Secret Witch album from 1985, which is a great album. But it was all the money that was spent, they only saw a little bit, and they end up, they to tour, to record their investment. Eventually, kind of they break even and make a little bit. But some musicians, unfortunately, they don't think like a business. They don't know. They sign any document, present it to them without consulting with a lawyer or reviewing the stuff and having a second opinion of somebody. But they would sign anything. They were desperate back in the day, so.
Yeah, I was. I didn't have that attitude. The other thing is that I think I was also approaching it a little bit more like a classical recording. I mean, if you're a composer and you've been commissioned to write an extended musical piece, a symphony, something, and it's going to be played by an orchestra, you don't just show up on the day and think it up on the spot. You plan everything out. Every part has been written. It's been transcribed, and the woodwinds all know what they're playing. The viola knows what the parts are. The cellos know what their parts are. So it's got to be all ready. And I was taking that approach. I can do this all offline and then come in and then record it. It's not in real time. It's going to take a couple of weeks, but I'm not going to be making it up on the spot. And I think I just wouldn't have been very. I would have been a nervous wreck, to be honest. If I have it planned out all ahead of time, then I know what's going to happen. It's very well controlled. If it's just winging it, and something as complex as the way multi-layered, multi-track recording is, it could go off the rails very easily, and that wouldn't work for me. I just don't think like that. So that was the approach. And as you mentioned with the touring, I didn't have that to fall back on. I didn't, especially in the earliest days with those early Moogs. They weren't live performance instruments in and of themselves. They could be an element within a rock band, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or something like that. You could have a big Moog as a soloing instrument with a rhythm section that kills. But I wasn't writing that kind of music, and I wasn't envisioning putting something like that together. So this was going to be recorded product.
Actually, this is your second album, Sequencer, which is another, for sure, it's another great album as well. Same question: what was the process of put it together? So after the first record, kind of you knew the business, you knew what they were doing, the level of effort. It was easier to, or although they're different type of music a little bit, but easier based on the fact that you already have released one before, or
Yeah, well, some of it was. I mean, I knew the ropes a little better. I was becoming a better engineer. The first album, when it came to recording it, I was okay, but the House of Music Studios staff people were there. There was always somebody that was sort of assigned to be around, at least at the beginning of my session, in case I had questions on how to patch this together or how to use that piece of equipment. In that intervening year, I became very close friends with the people that owned the studio. And they went through a big upgrade from 16 track to 24 track, a whole new console, new tape machines, new gear. And I'd volunteered to help them because I had a lot of those skills on soldering and wiring and, how to put together complex systems. So in that intervening year, while I was writing what was going to become Sequencer, I was also over at the studio with my soldering iron and helping out. And so I knew the revamped studio pretty much inside out. I didn't have any questions anymore because I'd helped build it. And that meant that when I hit the ground, which again was in January of the next year, it was starting to turn into a recording cycle, it was much easier. And I had refined some of my skills as a recording engineer. And I had some new Moog equipment that was more capable and was giving me a whole new palette of sounds. And then when it came to mixing it, where the first album we'd gone to another studio because it was the tail end of the quad fad, and we wanted to. That's we, meaning me and Passport Records, wanted to have a quadraphonic version of the album available. There were only a handful of studios that were capable of doing that. So on the first album, we went into New York to a place called Media Sound, one of New York's big famous studios. And Bob Clearmountain, who was a staff engineer at that time, was assigned to the overnight sessions with me, the brand new artist. and he mixed. It was cooperative effort. You know, it was. I was saying I want to hear this way, but he was the one that was executing it. I was watching how he did that. By the time we got to the second album, it wasn't done in quad anymore. That had kind of fallen by the wayside in the record business. So it was a straight stereo mix, and I was pretty confident in my abilities to mix it, and so I did. So I engineered the mixes, and but it went together again very similarly. I worked out what the parts were going to be. There was a little detour early on in getting the music. There had been a cooperative marketing venture with Laserium, the planetarium laser light shows, where they were using the first Synergy album in their shows, and there was some advertising that was bought in their program, and then there was an attempt in there. They were trying to create a new show, and there was a kind of invitation to prepare some commissioned, what would become commissioned work for a new custom show for them. So I put a lot of effort into that, and that and I don't know exactly what happened, but the commission never really materialized. They never really did a show of all newly generated music. So I guess maybe it was an internal decision there. But I had all this work done, and that became the one long extended piece, Sequence 14, on the Sequencer album. So that little diversion into working up ideas for Laserium just was adopted into the album. And then the only other thing that was was very record company directed was that they really wanted something that could be a single. And I was okay with that. I really didn't have an objection. And again, Marty Scott and I batted around a bunch of ideas and narrowed it down to Classical Gas or Telstar. So those are the two possible instrumental angles electronically. And so we did. We settled on Classical Gas. It was actually more difficult of the two, but I thought it worked better. And that was done. That was
both the first two albums, I think, were in the top 200 Billboard top 200 for some weeks, right? So did you?
Yeah, they did well. I mean,
You're right.
Again, the record company's part. That was Marty Scott, who was the president of Passport Gem Records, and his partner Seymour Stein, who was co-owner of Sire Records. And they were partners in Passport's venture. And Seymour, more than anybody, knew how to work the charts. So, he knew that how you made the phone calls in for reporting, how the retail, how you could make sure that wholesale reflected in retail properly, and you could get these great chart positions if you knew how to work the business a little bit.
Wow, that's pretty good.
They did that, but there were real sales. I mean, they actually, these were good selling albums. I have no complaints. Those guys did a really amazing job.
Mm. By the way, I forgot. I don't think I never asked you about where the name Synergy come from. Some makeup word, or just exists, or
well, it's funny. This was the band that I had before this that had a development deal that never came to completion was in the process of breaking up. And I had a long drive to go see my then girlfriend, hours away, and I was reading the Buckminster Fuller book, which was Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, Planet Earth. I have the book around somewhere. And there was a chapter called Synergy. And it was all about this quality of something becoming more than the sum of its parts. So a metal alloy where you've got two weak metals and you combine them together, and the alloyed metal is much stronger and much it's got properties that neither of the component elements had. That's called synergy, or that's the term that he had defined as synergy. I had never seen the word before, but I liked it because it had this synthesis first syllable. And I knew from the multi-track recording, that's very much the case. Sometimes you put 2, 3, 4 tracks together listen to them individually, and they're not that spectacular as an individual part, but when they are woven together, there's a complexity to the sonics that far exceeds what the component parts were. So I thought, well, I don't know if Bucky Fuller had thought about this, but I think it applies to sonics and music and arrangement as well. So between that, I said, I'm just going to use it. And I actually have a memo that we found years later that I had sent to Marty Scott from Passport Records from my, I typed it on my typewriter at work at the electronics company. Said, I've got a name for this project because I don't want my own name on it. I don't see myself as that. And maybe someday it'll turn into a band or something else. So I'd like to give it a brand rather than make me the solo artist. And said, here it is. It's Synergy. We never licensed it. I always expected at some point we'd hear from Buckminster Fuller's lawyer or something. Not a peep. Just used it. It after it came out, the word was really pretty unknown. We had to actually put out a definition in the press packet of what it actually meant. And then it was interesting because a couple of years, I'm trying to remember exact chronology, but I have a friend who was in grad school at Harvard, and we ran into the album was out, and we ran into the word in something to do with Harvard Business School. And I thought, oh, well, there's an interesting coincidence. It also happened that at the Harvard Coop, they had a big display of the Synergy albums. It's around the same time. And later, years later, I thought, wow, all of a sudden, the first place it really showed up outside of my music use was in business, in business school approaches to strengthening your corporation through Synergy. And I don't know if it's a connection that was made that way or not, but boy, the timing was just, like within the year or two after the album came out. And it was big on campuses. That was one of our strongest markets. So who knows? Maybe there's a connection, maybe not.
I think you should have trademarked the name at the time. You could.
Well, I didn't trademark it
No,
then, but I trademarked it not too many years later,
okay.
about 6 years later, because there was a synthesizer company that was starting to use it. And um, I was actually talking about allowing a different synthesizer company that I was close with, allowing them to have a license on it. And so it was interesting. My music business attorney got me hooked up with an attorney, a trademark specialist, and it turned out to be David Sarnoff, the founder of NBC, RCA's president. Turned out to be his granddaughter, and she was a trademark attorney. So I was very impressed that there was a connection there. I think she later ended up working for Apple, but it's many, many years ago. But her Sarnoff was in her name. So we trademarked it then, and it's gone through a couple of iterations, but the current trademark is renewed through 2030.
But looking back in your life, I imagine with all well, you learn a lot from your grandpa, and you were, building, fixing, developing. You have some patents. I assume you have, right?
Yes, I do.
In the electronic, or I don't know, what can be called electronic, right?
It's in audio work, but it's not
Audio.
specifically. It's funny. I never had anything with synthesizers or recording studio directly, but later, years later, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, my wife got involved in the hearing disabled with the Americans with Disabilities Act,
Let's see.
and there was a kind of a big gap in for people with hearing deficiencies, how to help them out, and she was working on Broadway theaters where they were providing these assistive listening systems for their patrons. And she started a company on her own to provide that kind of assistive listening in other areas. And she started primarily with the court systems, because if courtrooms, or if you don't provide Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, it ends up in the civil court. And so if the court didn't have a system, that would look pretty bad. So she approached the sales part of it with trying to sell the systems from Broadway into the court system. But they were way too big and expensive, and they required an operator, and it was much more complex. So I took a good look at the state of the art, and I tackled it, and I came up with a small portable. It's a very high powered but expensive system, and it used some NASA infrared LEDs that had just come on the market. It was actually right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and some what had been classified military illuminating equipment for aircraft became available out in the, for non-military use. So I employed that in the design, and I came up with a whole bunch of ways, and I got it into this small little unit that was portable for the court systems and didn't require an operator, just turn it on, it's self-calibrated, all that. And I went to the trademark attorneys. I had a big New York law firm that I worked with for the trademark protection, as well as the intellectual property on music publishing, you know, anything having to do with copyright. And they had a big patent division, but I never had touched the patent people. But I came in and I said, we're going to manufacture this product, and I just need to know, can you guys do a patent review on it? Because I need to know if I'm infringing on anybody else's patents. I came up with a whole bunch of ideas, and this was around, I don't know, 30 years ago, something like that. And they worked it up. They had a division that was lawyers who were also engineers, and they could go through it and look at relevant patents and stuff. And they came back and they had a list with 60 elements on this thing that were unique, that had not been done. They couldn't find any patent on. So they bundled it into two big patents, and it was really exciting. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was a lot of legal expense in it, but it more than paid back because the company was successful once she got that going. And ended up with two patents back in the 1990s. And they've since expired because patents are only 17 years. But it was great to see that, you know, all the drawings and my name in the patent office, along with my heroes like Thomas Edison and other people. So it was something I always, and it was audio. It was related. In fact, what I did was I took a look at some of the things we were doing in the recording studio. Not that I was copying anybody's patent, but we would use compressors and limiters and equalizers and things that we would do that I would normally do for voice, for intelligibility, and it wasn't in any of these existing assistive listening systems. So I built them all into my design, and a whole bunch of those got in there. And then I came up with they found a novel way to control the power output to the LEDs that were flooding this wireless infrared audio system that was more power efficient, didn't generate a lot of heat. So all of that ended up in the patents. And
good for you, man. Your third album from 1978 is unfortunately I don't have that one, but I have something that was sent to radio station back in the day. Chords. You know that track. I don't know how to pronounce it. Phobos and Deimos go to Mars. You know, it's yeah, it's like a special edited version, and then side B is this is a very good album, and I think the logo of the album also it's very famous, right? It was that was the one that was developed by Prognosis or
Hypnosis, yes.
yeah.
Their guys did that. And yes, Phobos and Deimos Go to Mars was intriguing. I mean, those are the two moons of Mars. So it was a little whimsical that they were going to Mars. But it was also around the time of the Viking landers, and they had launched and landed, and we were getting our first views off of that planet around the time that I was writing this. The reason for that single, and the single is in black vinyl, is because the album was in clear vinyl, and it actually turned out to be, you know, that was the beginning of the colored vinyl fad. And I talked with the mastering engineer, Bob Ludwig, who did a lot of my earlier albums, and told him that the record company wants, for marketing purposes, they want me to get this thing allowed to be pressed on colored vinyl. Is that a detriment to the sound? Does it enhance it? And he came back and he said that the thing you want to do is get them to do it in clear vinyl, because clear vinyl means they can't use recycled vinyl from records that didn't sell. That was a typical thing. They would unsold records would get melted down, label and all. There'd be all kinds of impurities, and then they'd get black records would get pressed again on what was worse and worse dirty vinyl. But if
Wow,
it's
yeah.
it had to be from virgin vinyl. They couldn't even put the dye in because vinyl, the black is not the color of the vinyl. It's dyed black, and that was just a tip of the hat at the beginning of the long player record period in the developed in the 30s, but really went to market at the end of the 1940s. The 78 RPM shellac records had a black graphite compound in it as a sort of a part of the componentry that I don't know if it was a lubrication or strength, but it made records were black. Vinyl was clear, but if they stamped clear records in 1948, people wouldn't really know what they were, so they dyed them all black. And so they kind of like the records people were familiar with from the previous 50 years. And so if it was virgin vinyl with pure black ink, not a problem. It could be very quiet. But anything other than that would get ticks and pops in it. So Bob Ludwig had said, get them to do it in clear. That means the little pancake, the little puck that they put on the press has to be straight out of the plastics factory. It can't be any other stuff in it. Otherwise, it will show. And so we did that. And actually, they were really good pressings. However, the DJs, they'd have the needle on the arm, try and place it on the disc. They couldn't see the banding because of the clear vinyl. It was picking up the room lights and reflections. So we did that single in black so they could see where the banding would be. And there were in full album versions of chords, a few of them only for DJs, white label versions that were pressed in black vinyl. But all of the retail copies went out clear.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you know your stuff well. Nowadays, it's like many, but I don't know I don't know the reason that a band will release a black one and then a colored one. Uh, I don't know what's the motivation to do a colored one from manufacturer point of view, for your point of view, and then from me point of view, seeing a black or a clear or a color, an orange one or whatever. Uh, I don't, I don't, I don't understand what.
Collectors, people that are completists, they want to have everything that was released by a given artist. It's a little closer maybe to stamp collecting than putting inside the music. But it works. There'll be sometimes 4 different colored versions with different color sleeves pressed or printed.
Yeah.
So that I chalk it up a little bit to its marketing and its record collecting, but not so much music listening. Sometimes sometimes somebody will buy it in every color and they listen to the music deeply and intently, but not always. Or they'll buy it in every color and only listen to it over Spotify or Apple Music. So go figure.
Cool. Oh, wow, what a waste. You have to find for you the quality Spotify is not that great. This album also is very good games. And,
that was the first one that I did that had any digital recording on it.
really, yeah.
At Bell Laboratories, where I was part of the composer in residence program, and some of it was done all digital synthesis and essentially smuggled out in the middle of the night and put on the album that way. But that was part of. I was a few years into the digital world at that point, but it was I was having a chance to dabble in the future. through the connection at Bell Labs, and it's where I knew everything was going, and that was the beginning of the breakthrough.
For you, man. Do you still have all the tapes, original tapes, or the equipment that you use, or it's hard to?
Well, a lot of the bigger equipment, the 2-inch multi-track recording machines and the studio consoles were really in the recording studios. I have a smaller version that I've had, and yes, some of them, it's a company called MCI, which was later bought by Sony, but they made an American company that made very good, very serviceable, but not the most expensive recording equipment, both tape machines and recording consoles. And House of Music originally was all MCI equipment, so they had MCI 16s and 24 tracks, a couple of different series of consoles, and then later, as the studio got more successful, moved up to Studer machines, Neve consoles, and there was even a solid state logic SSL console on order at one point. But at home, as I was developing my own recording capabilities, I bought a small 8-track MCI machine, a full-blown studio machine. It was every bit as complex and capable as the 8-track machine that had been at Abbey Road 8 years earlier, where the Beatles recorded their last album. And I still have that, but I never use it. It's become a $13,000 table that's got all kinds of other stuff piled on it. And I have a console that I've had a recording console that I used for many years, a Tascam that, again, is not really in the record chain anymore because it's all digital. But I use it to monitor things, and it's still in the studio, and it's sort of a table. So I've kept that. Most of the synthesizers that I've ever owned, I still have, but I don't use most of them anymore. I'd say newer generations have moved on, and it became more and more digital. I've switched over to that, to where most of what I do is now inside the computer system, and it has been for the last 20 years. I would say the majority of it's been that way.
Yeah, wow. So what do you plan to do with that, if you don't mind? With all the Whitman and the Tascan
Well, the old stuff, maybe it's just a little sentimental. It's
yeah.
these are the mini Moogs and the Moog modulars and the Oberheims and things. They're the ones that brung me here. They got me through those early years.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to toss them out. I hope they'll end up in a museum where they'll be
Sure.
not just because they're old, but also because they were the ones that were used to do
Yeah.
this or that. But inside the computer, it's been zeros and ones, and I got exposed to that literally months after the first album.
Wow. Yeah.
And that was Bob Moog's connection for a project at Bell Labs that he couldn't travel to, and I live just a few minutes car ride away. So he
Nice.
made phone calls and said, get this kid involved. And he's using my equipment, my synthesizer equipment. He's doing a great job with it. Couldn't have been nicer about it. Got me through the door, and I had connections in there from 1975 until pretty much the breakup of AT&T in the early 1980s.
Like a museum where I don't know if good point. I don't know if there exists one. There gotta exist one that where I don't know if somebody were to call it, the history of recording music, whatever, they will could show equipment used in the 20s, 30s, 50s of the war, and for this particular machine or Tascam, the following 10 albums were recorded, big, and so there was there gotta be a market for the people. I don't know if there exists one now. Now that you think about it, maybe I should look in the internet to see if there is such a thing.
Well, there are a lot of different places where it is now. The very earliest years of the recording business of
Yeah.
recording is something that I'm very closely connected to, and that's through the Thomas Edison National Historical Park. The that's also nearby. It's in West Orange. It's the same town in New Jersey where House of Music was, which I always like the irony that it's within about a 10-minute drive, you had the very first recording studio at the Edison Laboratories. They didn't call it a recording studio, they called it the music room. But it was the first room that had been built for the purpose of recording sound. And because until you invented a phonograph, you didn't really have any sound to record. So you didn't need a studio or purpose-built room. So that's there, along with the archives of the earliest years of this business as it got going. There's the research and development phase, which ran from about 1876, 1877 through 1888, where it was, and then commercialized, then pushed into commercialization. These are all cylinders, tinfoil at first, later wax and various plastic compounds. And that's all there. It's annotated. All the early recordings are there. The machines are there. You can see the evolution of the recording technology up until the end of the Edison Records era, which really launched in 1888. And they closed the doors right at the beginning of the Depression in 1929 on the recording side of it. But by then you had a lot of other labels going as well. So some of Columbia Records' earliest history on cylinder is also in the archives at that same museum. And we just see how it evolves. The ideas of music publishing and recording, how the copyright laws evolved as the record business got way ahead of the old music publishing or live performance business. So it's real interesting watching the roots of the business going back about 140 years at this point.
What's your take on AI nowadays that can take your music, all your records, let's say, everything that Larry Fast have done, train models on your music, right? And then create music, which is, so the input is yours, belong to you and your family. The output doesn't belong to you. This, Claudio did it, it's a weekend project. The music is kind of similar. It was based on yours. I don't have the rights. If I were to listen to AI output without train out, and I were to say to my wife, what do you think? Do you think that this is, was created via AI mechanism, or somewhere, some guy in New Jersey, we create this music? And of course, the law, patents, copyright are not there, right? So they are year behind. So what the right thing to do? I mean, in my example, I use your music, right? And your whole catalog, right? Larry Fax catalog. What can be done to protect you in that sense?
Well, there are a lot of legal actions going on right now from the publishers and the even the record labels about prohibiting scraping the internet to get the source material for the AI models, the generative AI models. So that's it's something that is going to take some time to catch up, but it's moving a lot quicker. For instance, going back to the early record industry days, there was a robust music publishing industry in the United States and in England. I don't know about how the rest of the world was structured, but I know those two countries going back to the 1820s. So if you wrote a song and you published it on a piece of sheet music, and you were the composer, you and the publisher would split the sale of that piece of sheet music. When records came out in the 1880s, there was no provision in the copyright law to allow for compensation. And it took until the Copyright Act of 1909 to put that into place. This is a similar kind of technological leap, and it's going to be, it's accelerated. I mean, it's happening right now. It's not waiting 30 years to play catch up. So it's something that's actually going to be some of the articles, and I read a lot about it. I get a newsletter from the music industry every morning. It's in my inbox. Every day there are actions and there's technologies. So one of them is very much like what school teachers are doing right now. That they get this wonderful paper from a kid who wasn't a very good student. They figure it's got to be generative AI that wrote the paper, and they've now got a reverse AI in a sense. It's just a different AI that's going in, and it's able to go in and find those sources that are in this kid's fudged paper. And I think that's where I'm seeing it, the first, more than first glimmers. It's kind of in beta testing to go into the example that you just said. A scraped, my catalog is scraped, it's gone into AI, it's spit out a sound alike of some sort. Will the reverse AI be able to find enough nuggets of the copyrightable information that was actually still recognizable and creating a copyright violation? So that's one possibility on it. The other is there already is quite a body of material on sound alikes. That was something that the commercial industry kind of got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The big case was Bette Midler had a hit with the song "Do You Want to Dance?" The Beach Boys had made a big hit out of it originally, and she did a slowed down version of it. And one of the ad agencies, and I think it was for a car company, wanted to use the Bette Midler version as the bed of music under this advertisement. And her people didn't want to do it. They didn't offer enough money for whatever the case is. So they created a sound alike. They found a singer that sounded like Bette Midler. They got an arrangement done that was almost exactly the same arrangement. They recorded it, they used it, they got sued, and they lost because it was the sound and likeness of a known artist. And so this is pre-AI. This is just, good old seat of the pants, stealing creative concept and sounds. So there's already a good body of legal scholarship on that and case law. And I think it can be applied retroactively. I also think people just kind of get bored after a while. Some of what makes people interested in, let's say you could clone a Taylor Swift song, which is enormously popular, and it sounds like Taylor Swift, but it's not Taylor Swift. Are the fans really going to be interested in a computer-generated AI version, or do they want the personality that's attached to that, or whatever little je ne sais quoi makes her special that a generative AI thing can't quite do? I'm starting to think that a lot of the, for some of the uses in background music, or elevator music and things where you don't want to pay copyright, a really generic AI may have a place in filling sonic space. But I think it's going to be looked back on as like parlor tricks. Oh, look what we could teach the computer to do. But if it doesn't have something to scrape, where's it going to go to the next level? I mean, if you took all 10 of my major albums and put them together in an AI and it spit out an 11th one that sounded like those, okay, that's all well and good, but each one's a progression from the one before it. What should the 11th have actually been? It won't have the spark to add that in because all it's doing is spitting back what's already happened. And so I think that'll get tiring to the public pretty quickly.
That's a very good point. And the same also, nowadays, many bands and venues are not allowing for people like myself that goes to a lot of shows to record. Pictures are okay, but you cannot record, and there are people walking around, prevent you to record, because then at the end of the day, a lot of those recordings end up in YouTube, and YouTube, I don't know, doesn't pay anything to the artist. So one hand, you don't have the money to pay, I don't know, $500 to see Taylor Swift, right? You pay a friend of you $100, record the stuff, upload it to YouTube, everybody benefit, right? A lot of people all over the world that could not afford to see Taylor Swift in this example can watch the stuff on YouTube. YouTube is posted, right? It's illegally because I don't know, YouTube is not paying publisher of music right to Taylor Swift, but many of us that I don't know, they don't have, or many of people that they like Taylor Swift and they don't have $500 or whatever to pay for a ticket, they can enjoy that with the cost of a beer on a Friday night watching the concert, which is not the same. But some of them, the quality could be very good, right? In 1040 or 4K, So what's your take? What can be done this stuff about that stuff?
Well, I mean, the other thing is that they are attempting. I watched the entire Eras tour on Disney Plus, and
Yeah.
it is beautifully done, beautifully shot, and nobody with an iPhone in the audience could possibly come close to the sonic quality and the surround sound and the 4K
Sure.
image. So, for the price, it was not a premium price. It was just my regular Disney subscription, which covers Hulu and everything else. So that seemed like a pretty good bargain because I've heard of $4,000 tickets, not $500 tickets for those.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's, but I mean, that's been going on forever. That it depends on the artist. King Crimson, back from day one, no recording, not even still images. They don't want to see a camera up. Be thrown out if we catch you even with a 35 millimeter black and white. So, that goes way back. And then there were a lot with none. Grateful Dead, for instance, though, we're the opposite. Record all our shows, trade them amongst yourselves. That's our community. And I think it's just there's a variety of different approaches that can be taken, and it depends on the artist. So the ones that have the larger expense, obviously YouTube is sort of the bane of your existence if you're trying to carefully curate and control the image. But I'm not sure. I think it's just going to be up to the artist. I know that my friends in the band Bon Jovi, for the longest time, no recording of the shows. They were controlling it, but they were selling the videos, and they were very much like what you were describing. That security at the venues were instructed. They see the little red LED come on, and means somebody's shooting a video. Go over there and take that away from them.
The Eagles, on the other hand, they have people employed that the only thing they do on a daily basis go to YouTube or whatever with different algorithm, a different program to see if any new gigs or song or tracks or were uploaded to YouTube, and they give you this track if you end up uploading the stuff and so on. Because then there's right. So the music belongs to them, right? Although it's a community principle, everybody benefits, but it's illegally because somebody. Well, we don't make any money selling a record. The only way we make money is touring. We expect people to pay for the stuff, so it's kind of illegal for somebody like myself record the stuff, upload it to YouTube, and then maybe in 3 days from now, the Eagle will say, no, we need to shut, turn it down.
Yeah. YouTube's got Google has a fairly robust content management system.
Yeah.
If you're the copyright holder, then you can choose to ignore things that go up. You can choose to have them pulled down as soon as they're discovered, either through your alert or their algorithms will look.
Yeah.
That's getting better at recognizing music. I mean, the same kind of Shazam principles that, lets your iPhone recognize what it's listening to. They're getting to the point where they can start recognizing melodies and things, even if it's not the original recording.
Correct. Yeah.
And the third one is to monetize it. So if you see that somebody's posted something and they're getting hundreds of thousands of views, but you own the content, you can choose to leave it up, but you get their advertising, you get the slice that they're not going to get it. It goes back, flows back, not necessarily to the artist. I mean, because the artists are important, but the artists have never, unless they actually own the label, they've never made the biggest share of the pie. It's the record companies, it's the publishing companies. It's essentially the institutional part of the music business that is the bank that funds everything. It's paying for the recordings up front and advancing the money. Ultimately, it comes out of the artist's pocket, but 9 out of 10 things put out there cost the label or the publisher or somebody's put up the money and they never recoup it. Band doesn't make any money, the artist doesn't make any money, they go away. Record company's left with a hole. And if it's leaking like a sieve on the stuff that is making money, then it's not a sustainable business. And this has been the problem all along, is how do you keep it sustainable? That's what was going on in the early days with the when everybody was just uploading, ripping and uploading to MP3s before iTunes brought a little bit of rationality and a revenue stream back.
Yeah. And yeah, and now Napster, right? So somebody will take a copy of your music, rip it, upload it a server somewhere, provide the URL, and everybody benefits, right? Of course, it's
Right. Everybody's
you know,
got it.
yeah.
And
Of
sometimes,
course, people are not buying music. Why can I pay if I can go to Napster paying $5 a month? I download millions of records for everybody, you know. So
yeah, I mean, one of the biggest leaks was actually out of one of the pressing plants, CD pressing plants out in north of South Carolina, where underpaid minimum wage employees were being paid money to basically spirit out what was going to be pressed to be released in the next couple of weeks or months. And those would find their way to pirate websites and they would go up. And even before the record's out. So now studios been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees. There's pressing that's costing hundreds of thousands, advertising campaigns and all that. And everybody's got it for free. And so
yeah,
that was the beginning. That's what I was saying around the in the 90s as that started happening. As soon as the internet could start transmitting reasonable sounding audio, didn't even have to be great sounding audio. That was the beginning of the end of it. And it's always been the music. It's a great song. It sounded great on AM radio. It sounded great on 78 RPM records. May not have been the highest fidelity or the best signal to noise ratio, but a good song's a good song. So if it was on a terrible sounding MP3 on Napster, but it was a great song, it's going to get distributed widely, but it's not returning any money into the ecosystem.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Your next album, Audio.
Yes.
Also very good album as well, man. Very good album. Feel free to elaborate on the pain of creating this guy.
No, that was actually, things were getting a little more advanced. I was using more and more computer control in creating that one. Small microcomputers, but early things, Apple II had a Pia synthesizer computer that had the same microprocessor system as Apple was using. And so there was software that would aid in the creation of that. This was still before MIDI, but it was kind of on the way towards that. And it was able, all I was talking with you about earlier about organizing ahead of time and planning how the album was going to be recorded. Well, for one thing, with that one, I was able to now start recording at home. This was actually the second album I had done that on, I think. Second, no, it might have been the third. But, well, regardless, I had the MCI machine at home, which was a full-blown studio quality recording machine, but it was only 8 tracks. So I started out at the beginning, I would record 8 tracks, bring them to the recording studio, back to House of Music, where I work all the time, and then dub off those 8 tracks onto a 24 track. And then I would add the rest of the overdubs in the studio. So that saved me some time. On this one, we now had lockup, what's called SMPTE lockup, which was something used in the motion picture and television industry. and you could lock multiple audio machines together as well. So what I was able to do was record the first 8 tracks, well, 7 tracks and a time code track, bring it to the studio, dump it off onto a 2-inch larger tape, and then reduce it down to just a reference mix and the time code track, and then go back home. I had 6 more tracks to play with. And if I had computer control, I could be squeezing more onto those individual tracks because the computer could handle a few of the different synthesizer module parts at the same time. So on that album on Audion, I actually went back to 16 track from 24 track. The 16 track does sound a little better. It's got wider tracks on 2-inch tape. 24 track, you're squeezing 24 into the same space as 16. So there's everything in tape recording has to do with how much real estate are you giving the magnetic sound. So the more real estate you can allow on the tape for each track, the better it's going to be. Deeper, richer basses, and more percussive. So I did that with audio. Went back and did almost all the recording at home, and then locked it up and then mixed from the 16 track. And that's about all there is to it. It was my songs. Some of it I had worked on during Peter Gabriel, during work on some of the Peter Gabriel tours. That became something. There's a lot of downtime when you're touring, so I would always carry a small keyboard and sketch ideas on a cassette recorder or in a notepad, and I was able to start building what were going to become the pieces of that album.
Yeah, good for you, man. Good for you. Then you end up reading this guy, Jupiter Menace, and it. I don't know. I've never seen. I don't know if this is a movie or documentary, but never.
It's a
Right?
well, it was supposed to be a documentary, but it was like really poorly researched, sensationalized documentary. It was the kind of thing that later cable television got very adept at doing about, um, stretching the truth, aliens and looking for sensational stories, alien spaceships and that sort of thing. So this was supposed to be a documentary. It actually had the actor George Kennedy narrating it and appearing on screen as your credible guide through this thing. But the script was just, it was really kind of funny. I mean, all of us that were working on it, we got in trouble once because I think it was sound editor and one of the film editors and me and a few others who were working in post-production on the film. We were just laughing at how ridiculous it was. A couple of either producer or the scriptwriter, somebody walked in. What's so funny? When they found out, they were not pleased. They were taking it seriously. We weren't. So it's a great piece of kitschy art if you want to see the film. If I don't even know if it ever came out on DVD or anything. But for me, what worked out really well for me was that the film company, film producers, and I guess the director liked the Synergy albums, and they came to the record company in order to license some of the existing music. They just dropped it into their film. It wasn't going to be a new score, but and that was fine. We were all willing to do that. As things were going along, they were realizing, well, gee, there's no piece of music that fits this scene. Do you think you could write something for that? And then there would be another one. So I ended up writing about, I don't know, maybe another 20, 25 minutes worth of music that they could use in the film, along with some of the pre-existing music that had been adapted for the music. They actually had some good stuff in the film. I don't want to make it sound like it was all terrible. They had some very early computer graphics about an earthquake on the West Coast, a few other things like that. They were actually pretty skillfully done. When I went back and looked at them years later, was these guys were quite ahead of their time. We later found out some of those people ended up at Industrial Light and Magic or some of the other big imaging shops in Hollywood later. But this is where we were all cutting our teeth. And this was at the very end of the film dubber era. This was where magnetic sprocketed film was used for the audio tracks. not the kind of studio recording I was used to. So I had to transfer everything, or the studio transferred everything to what were called dubbers, and they were all synced with 35 millimeter projectors, and it was all mixed from banks and banks of these dubbers with one track or two tracks per machine. And it was the very end of that technology, and I got to see it. I got to actually work with it hands on just before things started switching over to the more advanced analog, and then very quickly into digital. So it was good for me. I got to learn the lingo. I was pretty adept at the recording record business side of things, the recording studios, but I hadn't really done anything in professional film, in Hollywood feature film. So I was out in Hollywood for a couple of weeks, and I just got to, learn the lingo, learn how the workflow went. So that was good for me, just to know in the future for any scoring gigs that would come up. And that was it. But then, of course, the rights were retained by Passport Records to put out a soundtrack album, and that's what you had in your hand.
Yeah, got it, got it. Then the Metropolitan Suite, which is very good as well, man. I like all your stuff,
Thank you.
and I'm not saying that because I'm talking to you, but and then as we talked before, they end up releasing this special radio 12-inch single, not for sale. Unfortunately, it's in Discogs. For Redstone and Metropolitan, same main theme. This is very good, man. Very good album, actually. The main one, the Metropolitan Suite. What memory do you have?
Well, that was the first one that was recorded digitally. And in fact, in recent years, because I've been trying to catalog everything, it was recorded on an early digital tape. Didn't really last for very long. We went from analog tape and with this kind of interim period where there was digital linear tape that, and there were three different systems. 3M had one, Sony had one, and Mitsubishi had one, and they were all incompatible with each other. And then they were very quickly supplanted by adapting video recorders, both VHS and 8mm video, to record digital audio. And very soon after that, it just went straight to hard drive. It went, right into the computer, which is where we've been ever since. It hasn't really, it's gotten better. The quality's gotten better. The software is more reliable and stable, but probably the last 20, 25 years we've been in that place. So this was my first leap from analog recording to digital linear. And just about a little over a year ago, I've kept the one digital master and had made analog copies so there would be a backup. But those digital tape machines were frighteningly expensive. So you could rent one in the studio. You used it real quick and real efficient, which I did. And to get two of them in just so you could make a safety copy, that was an impossible expense. So that had never been done. So I had the original master, but it hadn't been put on a machine to play back since 1986. And
Wow.
a very good place in Philadelphia, just outside of Philadelphia, that had a playback system that could play those tapes and transfer them to digital hard drive to modern format. And they were able to do that. They turned it around within a day or two. And I was blown away at how good it sounded. And they so now I've got copies of that for future releases, so future vinyl, future most surround mixes, anything, and it's just all been preserved. So all the albums have now been transferred that way. That was the only one that was digital, though. All the others were analog, straight to hard drive.
That's for you, man. Feel free to elaborate. I know you have been working on historic preservation task that you mentioned before they were contributing. Feel free to what those are and why that is important to you to to pay back a little bit and to society on those historic tasks that you participate.
Well, I just happen to like the. I've always had an affinity for architecture. I did some college level architectural coursework, and I always found that it was an embodiment of the historic periods. And my degree is actually in history, but don't have degree in engineering or music or anything else. So it's all kind of embodied in that. And I might, had I not done music or ended up in law school, architecture might have been something, engineering might have been something. But I found the affinity for the buildings and the different historic eras to be very compelling. And I hate seeing older buildings torn down unnecessarily. There's a lot of art to almost a sculpture that goes into architecture, and the thought processes that are in it are not dissimilar to how I see music being constructed. There's a framework, there's a story, there are finite boundaries. It's got to carry its own weight. Sometimes you want it light and airy, sometimes it's big and bold. So there are different elements to it, but the architectural framework, it's always in many of them, graphics, visual, sculpture, music, of course, being very related. And so because of that, and this wanting to see older buildings preserved, particularly ones of significance, I kind of threw myself into a couple of battles early on, many decades ago, in trying to preserve them from the wrecking ball, and generally had some successes. And I eventually got, I'd already had connections with the Edison National Historical Park, and those are all 1880s, and except for the family home, 1870s vintage structures. And how did they go together? How do you keep them together? And so that gave me a very good grounding between that and the architectural studies. And eventually I got appointed to a government, it's a board, sort of a commission that's involved in not just preserving the buildings, but funding, giving out grants, very large grants in some cases, in order to help these older buildings that deserve to be preserved get preserved, not have other funding sources. And old buildings are expensive to keep going. You don't want slate roofs that cost a fortune to replace, and pointing bricks from 250 years ago or 300 years ago. It's expensive. There's a lot that goes into the infrastructure, but I kind of like it, and it just fits in with what I'm doing. Over at Edison, you kind of get the confluence of where the technologies as well. So you're starting to see electrical lighting, the beginnings of audio sciences, and that's picked up by Bell Labs and the next generations. A lot of our modern era gets invented there. But I just see the whole thing interconnected.
Great. And some can be turned into museums, I suppose, right? And I don't know, a government entity give you whatever or lend you 50 grand to you guys to fix or repair, and then it become a museum. They can charge $5-10 a person, or 20 a family, and then in a way record that hypothetical 50,000 number that I just gave you, right? So in a way, but so.
Well, some of the architectural ones that we've done, the historic preservation, they maybe split over several grant cycles, but we're talking seven figures. There's some serious dollars into that.
Got it.
But it's taxpayer money, so that's a matter of keeping a very tight rein on it, so that it's actually being used for what it's supposed to be used for. And it's been fine. We've done over 400 projects since I've been on that board now. And they've all been very high quality, historically accurate, and they cover the range of American history.
Good for you, man. Good for you. I read somewhere that you have written and recorded more commission work over the last 30 years or so than all of your Synergy album combined, right? So
there is a lot.
Yeah. Do you have a list of everything you have done, or you have lost track of?
Oh, no, because a lot of that work, there's a lot of things that I did in the early days of XM satellite radio. I was with them for about 10 years as kind of a composer in residence to create everything from the sonic logos through interstitial music that was done. Some of the XM people then went to WGN America Television, which was in 70 million households of basic cable. And I did a lot of writing, even got an Emmy for a baseball theme that I came up with. But again, these are, it's a different part of the business. So it's not like being a recording artist. You're getting paid well, but somebody else owns the rights on most of those. I did all the music for a Disney theme park in Tokyo, in one section, one of the villages of the Disney Sea. Right now, there are actually some people that are working on the legal side on my behalf, trying to see if we can license it back or somehow get rights and maybe release that, because that's sort of a missing Synergy album. It was 3 hours worth of material from boiled down to the basics. Makes us 7 hours worth of new music that was created for the. And I hadn't listened to it in 20 years when somebody brought it up in conversation with somebody in the business. Went back and listened to it. And it's actually pretty good.
Good for you.
It was done about 15 years after I went to Sweden. I was getting to be an even better writer at that point. So there's that kind of. So we'll see where it goes. I mean, I look at a lot of this as quality of writing and arranging. The technology keeps getting easier to do.
You still currently nowadays, you still write music, compose music, and record music? Or?
I've got a lot of sketches and themes that are unfinished. You know, they go from extremely primitive to some things that were kind of far more advanced. You know, that showed up either as a track on a sampler on a new age label or something, you know, where I was just invited to contribute. A couple of times those have happened in the last decade or so. And so they're out there, but no, I never stopped thinking about it. And I'm always jotting things down. The computer in the studio, that's the one where everything sort of ends up being stored. And there's a lot of stuff. There's more stuff collected as here's a theme, here's another theme, here's something that could be constructed together. If they were just to be straight old Synergy albums, I got more stuff than I can use for the rest of my life, probably. I probably don't have to come up with any new ideas. Enough there. But it's finding completion time too, and what's a good outlet. You know, it's not
sure.
You don't want it on Napster or just showing up on YouTube. And you know, I like when people like it, but I like the controlled release of the way the traditional record label structure works. You know, that we're going to put together a collection. It means something. We'll put it out as an entity, not just stuff that leaks out the edge of the internet.
Sure. Do still people call you from a film composer, a particular company, or asking, do you have any new material? We want to do the best of Larry Fast, or work the other way around, where you begin writing some music and you think it's pretty good, and then you approach, I don't know, like a commercial company, or Coca-Cola, or Xerox, or whatever, or IBM. Man, I think I saw your ad in TV. The music is terrible, but you know, I've been composing music. I think that could be great for the Super Bowl, or this or that, or whatever, or it work only one way stream.
It's a different hierarchy. I did do that for a while with
Yeah.
a company called Radio Kings, and they worked with most of the major Madison Avenue advertising agencies. And I had done, I'm trying to think, American Airlines and Allied Chemical when they were still a standalone company, and probably about a dozen big campaigns.
Wow.
And but the way it works, you know, there's a whole political hierarchy within the Madison Avenue agencies and how they work with the music vendors, and even that has changed since I was more deeply involved in that. I did a lot with Johnson and Johnson as well too. In fact, they ran a lot of that in-house. They had their own worldwide video network, and I was doing custom music for them for Some of the stuff never hit the general public. It was always inside the health industry. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they were one of the first ones that moved into the new Russian Federation. And I did the music for their first big ad campaign in
Wow.
the 90s.
Oh.
And I still have those things on my reel, but you know, they're really like little time capsules at this point. So yeah, it's just different. I mean, it works through agents. You know, it's not the kind of thing. You know, occasionally you can book something like that, but usually somebody knows that, you know, they're friends with a director or one of the agents who's working for a particular client, and they know somebody who knows somebody. There's a lot of networking involved in it, and I just, you know, I was in that network for a while, and then I kind of moved on to other things, and you know, it would be really hard to get back into it now. People are probably 50 years younger than I am. Maybe they'd like an old timer. I don't know, but it's at this point, it's not really necessary. My days are filled, and I've got a lot of things to be doing, so I'm not looking at that.
Do you plan on selling? I don't. You own your music, right? Your publishing, right? If somebody were to reach out to you and were to be a good deal on the table for you to make it worthwhile, do you do you plan on doing that? Would you like to do that? It makes sense because nowadays you see all the big number, right? Stevie Nicks sell their catalog for 700 billions or whatever. You know, the three Genesis guy, you know, end up selling the Sheriff. You're right. No, of course, not Steve Hackett or Peter Gabriel, but Tony and then Phil Collins and Mike Radford. They maybe, you know, I don't know, a lot of money. Do you, or you prefer to keep on having control of your own stuff?
So it
Or
kind of,
that?
I actually spoke, a lot of those are Wall Street equity firms at heart, really, that are buying it. They're buying these things as an investment, and they have the ability to tap into huge pools of capital. And I spoke with one of the big ones. I'm not going to go public with who it was. We had a wonderful Zoom call with the two principals, and these guys were paying, you know, literally in the low billions of dollars for some of the properties that they were acquiring. And it had come up through a mutual acquaintance who was involved in state pension fund capital investments. Again, also in that price range, hundreds of millions to low billions of dollars. And somehow my name came up, you know, I guess because of the confluence of big money and music, and I'm only the music side. But we had a really good talk, but it also became clear that my level of success in the business, which is good for me personally, is nowhere near what they would make a pitch to me for. Not the kind of money that you're talking about, you know, buying Stevie Nicks catalog or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were interested, and we had a good conversation because I know a lot of the people that they were interested in. And in fact, I've since seen that one or two of the names that I had mentioned to them as I had worked with, they have acquired. But you know, if by some fluke they were to offer that kind of $500 million and up, oh, I'd be definitely interested in talking to them. But at this point, don't really need the money. So I'd rather keep control over it at this point. You know, if it has value, it'll have value later, I would think. And if it doesn't, I won't be around, so I won't know it anyway. So it doesn't really make that much difference. I'd rather at this point I control the masters. I after Gem Passport Records went out of business, and that was many decades ago, everything reverted to me. So I've got the publishing and I've got the masters, and everything's been recorded subsequent to that, unless it was a buyout by a big broadcast entity or something. You know, then it stays with me. So that's fine, and I can license it, and it does get licensed from time to time. Things come through, but they're obscure things. You know, some kind of a commercial in France was very lucrative a couple of years ago, but I didn't have anything to do with putting it together. It was the people that manage my international publishing were the ones that did the collections on that.
Oh, that's great, man. That's great. Yeah, I wonder how the equity fund can return. How can have a return on investment? Because it's a lot of money, right? So I don't know if I were to throw a number, Stevie Nicks in the, I don't know, mid 70s. She's still touring. She's rich. Somebody offer her $500 million. She will take it, of course, right? And the family, and that's great. She earned it. Now, on the other end, right? The guy, the group, the investor, equity fund that put in $500 million, right, to give to Stevie Nicks, and we own everything. Don't worry about everything. They will give you a check in a couple of weeks. How they can recover that investment? I mean, it isn't that she's going to be touring, record sales, are not that great. Movie that music is not that could be, I don't know, be used for commercial or nothing like that, or movies. Uh, know that people down the road they're going to keep on buying CDs and cassette or vinyls or stuff like that. I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I don't know how can they will be able to record that $500 hypothetical number down the road. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know that in the long run, because I remember one of the first big ones that did this advanced buyout was David Bowie, and it wasn't
Yeah.
anywhere near as much, but it was still around 100 million.
Yeah. Wow.
I just didn't see how it would return that for the investors. But the other thing is that it becomes an asset that can be traded along or bundled with others, and maybe that's what they're looking at. Selling it to the next schnook that'll pay 750 for it.
Wow.
I don't know. It's a part of finance that I view a little suspiciously, and if somebody wants to put the cash on the table, and I'd be happy to take it, but I just don't see my place in the firmament of being that place. Not a composer like this.
Great, man. Larry, thank you again for your time. We talked for almost 2 hours before, and I'm quite sure down the road we'll do a part three because you're very knowledgeable. You've been very grateful with your time and educating me, and we went over your music. So I'm very happy, and hopefully we can get together one day, and we'd like to take you out to dinner, or a coffee, beer, whatever, and then you will sign my stuff from my collection down there in the basement. And you're a good person, and you're a great musician. You have done well in your life, and of course, you have worked with Peter Gabriel and many other artists that are great. So you're a good guy, man.
Well, thank you, Carter. Enjoy talking with you. We'll do a part three. We'll see. There are a couple of things with the catalog that's been digitized, and looking at what to do in the modern era with these recordings. So, to bring them into the next decades. And so we can have a big talk about that when we finally get there. It'll be a little down the road, but
yeah, definitely. Thanks again, Larry. Say hello to your wife, and very, very nice talking to you. And we'll get together very soon, man.
Good talking with you.
Thank you.
Have a blessed day.
Same here, man.